uh, John, and we're going to be discussing the basics of aircraft purchasing and maintenance. I will go ahead and let Domenic take over here, and you guys feel free to open up with any questions you may have.
Cool. Hello, I'm Domenic Giunta. So I am a board member with the NextGen team here at the Airmen, and we really work with getting education out to students and new pilots. And I am really excited. So one of the biggest questions we get and some of the challenges we get is, one is how do you become a pilot? And there's a lot of information out there, but there's not a lot of information on how to purchase your first airplane, and how to maintain it, and aircraft ownership. So today what we've done is got a great panel together. We have Aras, Sirvelis, and John Fick. Aras is a mechanic over at Pratt Aviation, and John Fick is a current aviation instructor over at King Career Center. So I've got Zoom camera angles and camera shoots. So when we have a question on chat, I'll go ahead and ask it, and we'll have our panel ask or answer that question for us. So without further ado, let me get us connected to our team, and I'll introduce our panelists. Cool. So I've got John or Aras, if you can introduce yourself.
Yep. Hi, my name is Aras. I am a private pilot. I work as a mechanics helper for Pratt Aviation, and currently at UAA working on my getting my A&P license. And also a board member for the NextGen board.
Awesome. And John.
Hello, I'm John Fick. I currently teach at King Tech High School, aviation technology. I've been a commercial pilot here in Alaska since early 80s. Bought my first airplane in '83, and I've owned 4 of them. So I know a little bit about this routine we're talking about today, and I thank you for letting me sit around and talk about airplanes. It's about my favorite thing to do.
That's awesome. So to help things along kind of quickly, I'm going to ask the question, if you can repeat it so that people at home can hear it.
Yep.
It might help a little bit. But one of the first questions we received was, what is the average cost yearly maintenance for an aircraft, like oil changes, annuals, and unforeseen items? I'll start with you. What's your experience been?
The annual cost will vary significantly based on the type of aircraft, level of aircraft. You know, if it's a light single engine with smallish engine, figure annuals can vary so immensely. Trying to think of a good number to put on it. Maybe John, if you have anything, I
think I do. It's a real ballpark, and like Aras said, it varies wildly, but I tell people to estimate about, believe it or not, about $5,000 of fixed costs a year. So that would be everything but gas. The maintenance, and you're gonna have to pay an A&P to do the inspection, unless you're gonna do it yourself, of course, unless you're a mechanic. And just routine maintenance and things that come up. One thing about aircraft parts is that they are expensive, crazy. I mean, those of you that have owned boats know that those are pretty expensive too. But my joke is that just about every part on the airplane costs about $1,000, about $1,000.
Very good way to look at it.
I changed a fuel selector just last year. I went out, I own a 180 on floats, and went out there after the winter. It was sitting up all winter, and drip, 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 fuel was dripping out of it. It was a fuel selector. Crazy little tiny fuel selector like this. Just the rebuild kit was a couple $100, and then to get it rebuilt was what, $700 or so. If it was an automobile part, it would have been $59. So and if you have a major problem, it can be thousands, if not tens of thousands.
Well, and that's one of the questions you brought up. So what is the annual? When people say, I've got to set aside money for an annual, what is that exactly? John, let me start with you.
Well, just to get the sign off, just to have a mechanic come out and sign it off. If you got the truck mechanics, the guys that go around and will come to your airplane and sign it off. The cheapest just to get their signature, the cheapest you're going to have is about $600 or so. At least that's what it was last year for me. I'm a mechanic, so I do the work myself, tear the airplane apart, and then if they have any squawks, then I'll work those off, and then we talk about it, and they say okay, and then they sign it off. One way to make it a lot cheaper is to work with a mechanic that will allow you to tear the airplane apart. You know, open up inspection panels, take the interior out, and stuff like that. A lot of the shops won't allow you to do that. They won't allow you to work in their shop. Some do though, and so that'll help make it cheaper. But
Aras, what has your experience been working in the shop? What kind of costs are they going to anticipate?
Yeah, so I mean, it's for me personally, I do almost the same as John. I do all my annuals. I do the tear down of the just to make it a more affordable ownership experience, I guess is the best way to put it. I mean, it like you said, it varies so immensely. I mean, some places, I mean, it just depends on the level of maintenance that the airplane has seen before. If it's usually what everyone says is your first annual of ownership is usually the most expensive because there's usually a new mechanic involved, new owner involved. There's so much more to it involved. It's hard to put a number on an annual. It really is. I mean, but just the base inspection is, you know, exactly what John said. The base inspections, they're normally about the same. It's the corrective actions to make it airworthy if it needs them that end up being pretty pricey or can be pretty pricey.
Okay, and once the annual is completed, you know, we get this squawks and items that need to be addressed. What are those?
So those are actions that need to be corrected to make the aircraft airworthy. So if the brakes are beyond wear limits, so that would be a squawk. You're needing to fix, or I guess that would be for the annual squawks would be, you know, these are what you need to fix to make it airworthy after the fact. Once those are all complied with, then your annual signed off as airworthy, basically.
Okay. So,
and then you'll have, I guess when you're talking about squawks, also you'll have your throughout the year of your, you know, you're in annual, but you're flying, you run into, you know, my brake suddenly started to die on me during flight or coming in, or my tires are getting below wear limits, I want to change them out. You know, then you're adding in, you know, you don't just have an annual, there's other things that happen throughout the year that unforeseen, I guess, is what I would say is unforeseen items. So.
We see one other question that we just had come in. What are some of the make or break items when it comes to looking at for that annual for that aircraft? So your annual comes in, they give you some items to look at, and then some items that must be done. Is that correct?
Well, so the make or break is more on the purchasing. You're looking at buying an aircraft. You get it in for a pre-buy, and you get a list of squawks from the person doing the inspection on it. And at what point do you say, I need to back out of this aircraft? What are the make or break? You know, the mechanic or the person inspecting it finds that your gearbox or gear castings are cracked. You know, that for me personally is a make or break because the level of work that goes into something like that, it's a major structural repair, or there's you're inspecting the engine and you find slight corrosion in it. You know, there's a very, very expensive item that just you think at that point, is it worth continuing through this? Is it something that I'm willing to put the time and effort and money into fixing it to make it airworthy again?
Okay. And John, I guess that also a question would go to you as well. Airworthiness and items that need to be addressed.
okay.
Are those are listed on each annual every year?
Yeah, so the mechanic will go out, and the IA will go out and inspect the aircraft and then write up a list of squawks or problems that airplane has. Now, if you're going to be buying an aircraft, then you want to have a mechanic do a pre-buy on it, which is like a mini annual. And my suggestion would be that they do the squawks, and then you ask the mechanic, okay, how much is this all going to cost me? And then you have to make the determination at that point whether or not you want to continue with it. But So they, well, to give you an example, when the current airplane I have now is a 180, and bought it about 10 years ago. And my first annual on that was eight grand. And I did a lot of the work myself, not all of it, because it was kind of a big deal. And I didn't have, I'd never owned a 180 before that, so I wanted somebody with more knowledge on 180s to actually do the annual. But and that's not that unreasonable for a first airplane. Yeah. I got a fairly good price on it because it did have a couple of issues, but yeah. And a lot of that is also the mechanics you go to. Some mechanics are, it might sound a little bit odd in a fairly regulated environment like aviation, but some mechanics are a lot more yeah, you know, picky about everything, and some and this comes down to your own comfort level as far as the owner goes. How much you want to delve into making your airplane into a cream puff or whatever.
Now, would an annual be the same as a pre-buy?
No, the pre-buy is shorter, and usually, but they'll do some of the most important things. They'll do the compression check and the inspection for, you know, airframe integrity and things like that. So they'll, and especially if you get a mechanic who knows whatever airplane you're buying well, they should know. They should be, you know, they look at the trouble spots. And of course, the biggest, you know, the biggest thing is the engine. It's a little bit of the unknown, especially if it's an older airplane, especially if the engine's been in. It's not unusual for an airplane to have had the engine in there for even, maybe it's only got 1,000 hours on the engine, but it's been in there for 20, 30 years. So the engine's always a little bit of a mystery, but you need to at least do the compression check and have them check.
And those items are done, people at home might not be able to hear me, but those items are done at a pre-buy, not an annual.
Oh, they're done both, but certainly you'd wanted to do it on a pre-buy, because if you have a bunch of cylinders that are flat, a lot of money very fast.
Okay.
Hey, Dominic.
Yes.
Whenever we get to a stopping point, we do have a couple questions here from a couple people.
Okay.
So our first question is from Robert Kelly, and he asks, what are their thoughts on owner assist annuals / maintenance?
Great.
Owner assisted, excuse me.
Great. I'm going to start off with Aras over here. Aras, what are your thoughts for an owner assisted?
I absolutely love owner assisted annuals. I think so. We do owner assisted annuals at the shop that I work at. Absolutely love it. It's a great experience for not only teaching the owner about their aircraft that they are flying, they learn so much, but also for them to understand the level of work that goes into, you know, you hand someone a bill, this took me this amount of time, you know, why? You know, that's just a simple thing. Until they see and do it, you get a great understanding for how things operate, how things work, and the time spent on doing it. And it also will lower your costs down. You know, if pulling inspection panels, you know, you can the owner can pull inspection panels, and there you go. You save yourself 2 hours, 2-3 hours, however long it takes to do that. You're sure you're spending your own time, but in the end, you're not having to pay an A&P to do that for you. And it's great. You know, it's a very good experience. The people that I've done it with, they absolutely loved it.
That's what I think. Absolutely, there's a huge value. John, we give you the opposite side of that. Why would a shop not want you to do an owner assisted?
Well, the larger shops generally don't allow the owners to help them. I think it's just a matter of kind of slowing them down, and I don't really know exactly why. I've never really asked, but they and having the owner there adds a kind of a level of complexity to it for the guys. You know, sometimes in in the shop that I helped them do my my annual. They grudgingly allowed me in there and to work on it because I've been a mechanic so long and all that. But there were a lot of arguments, and they were almost like a dysfunctional family. And maybe they don't want you to see that side, you know, of it. And so I think that's it. But it's and the other thing to add on what Aras said is, you know, the more you learn about your airplane and the peculiarities about it, all airplanes have you know, slightly different issues here and there, and stuff that you're kind of looking at or keeping an eye on, and that just informs you and not only working on the airplane but flying it. And the more you know about your airplane, I tell everybody that you should do as much work on your airplane as you feel comfortable doing, even if you're not a mechanic. And of course, I don't know, I got a buddy that's probably a better mechanic than I am, and he doesn't even have an MP because he's always working on his airplanes, and I've been out of it for a while, actually working on the things. So so just because someone doesn't have an AP doesn't mean they can't. And there are certain things you can do.
Yep.
And that's one thing we were going to talk about today. So that's kind of an important deal.
That would be a great segue. Some of the things that you can do. So we went through, like, we'll talk about the pre-buy in a second.
Oh, okay.
Getting that kind of the walkthrough there. We talked about annuals, but then let's talk about the ongoing maintenance for a class, or excuse me, for an airplane. Ongoing maintenance, what can you do, what can you not do, and what should you never do? So let's start there. I'll start with John, and then Aras, and then you had some ideas on that as well.
Okay, well, the regs actually spell out, I think it's like 67 items. I don't remember how many items, but a number of items, a lot of items that you can do as and they actually spell it out exactly. It's right there, right there in the regs, what you can do. And it's actually quite a bit. You can change spark plugs, remove and replace spark plugs. You can remove and replace your tires. You can change oil and remove fairings and panels and cowling, of course, and stuff like that. So, and maybe Aras has a better knowledge of the list.
To you as well, what items have you seen done that are successful? And I'd like to throw this out there. What items have you seen that people should never do?
Well, so the list of items in the FARs, it gives you, I can't remember them at all now, but that list is what you are legally able to do. Doesn't always mean you should be doing it. I have seen some questionable maintenance done by owners just because they're not around it as much as the mechanics are. You know, oil changes sound simple and can be simple, but if you're not doing them right or are unexperienced doing it or haven't gotten proper training in it, is not always a good recommendation for some. It's with the owner maintenance. I think they define it as owner preventative maintenance. Is that just because it's there, you should get the proper training. You know, there are plenty of mechanics out there that will show you, you know, this is how you do an oil change. And, you know, it sounds like a simple thing. This is how you do it. This is how you change a tire. You know, it's not, there's little things to it that you might know. I've done it a few times in the summertime where we go over an owner like, this is how you change a nose wheel out, because they want to learn how to do it themselves. And we're more than happy to help them learn, because it's something that they are allowed to do, and it's safer for them to get the proper training than have to, you know, say, oh crap, this is broken, or I just now wrecked my airplane because I installed it incorrectly. So.
That's a great point. You know, we did have another question on our chat, and this is a great question. Maybe some of you have had experience with it. Partnerships in an airplane, when I've heard of people buying into a shared aircraft. Have either one of you had experience in that, and pros and cons for that? Aras, the camera's on you first.
From talking to other people, I've never personally been in an aircraft partnership, but from talking to other people, it seems to either work amazing or not at all. Partnerships, it's just finding the right person, figuring out a good contract on how everything is going to be run, who's paying for what, how is the cost broken down per year. there's a lot of that goes into the partnership, and with the aircraft, the shares, if you're, I guess it's also the same thing, but where you're buying into a share, those can be great, but you can run into some issues. I've heard people running into issues. Other people absolutely love them. I've got a friend of mine that's been in an aircraft partnership for 3-4 years now, absolutely loves it because he has figured out a way that works perfectly for them. Yeah.
John, do you have any experience with that?
I personally don't, but I've known several people who have, and of course it's a great deal if it's the right partnership, because most people don't fly their airplanes enough as it is. And so if you've got a partnership of one other person or two other people, then that defrays the cost. And we already talked about the fact that I really think you need to budget about $5 grand a year just for the fixed costs, not counting gas. But I think one of the biggest things is you've got to be very similar in the way in which you approach the maintenance of the airplane, because I think that's where the biggest friction happens, because there's an amazingly different level of security or whatever it is with owning an airplane. Some people want everything absolute, done this way, and and then some people are a little more slapdash about that. So, and we're talking big money here sometimes, and so it could be a big source of friction. And then you got the problem also of you got two folks flying the airplane. What happens if while one of them is flying it, you have some kind of incident or whatever? And so who pays for that? And how are you going to work all that stuff out? So I think if you know the person well and you feel like you've got the same level of need to how to maintain the airplane, then I think it would work pretty well.
I think going back to that, I think I've heard, and to answer it from my end, it's just like getting into a business where you really need to know your partners.
Yep.
You're getting involved with is one, and then two is making sure you have capital to continue with those partners, decide to bail or something happens, and having all the agreements in place before you get into that involved.
And in a way, it is a business because it's and a fairly expensive one. You've got this thing that you've got this baby you've got to both take care of, and there's lots of different ways of doing that. Yep.
All right, we've got another question that just came in, and this is a great one. And let me see if I can get to the mic here and get a little loud. If one is in the market for purchasing a used aircraft in Alaska for the first time, what are the options? Are there dealerships, reliable brokers, classified ads? What are the risks and benefits of each option out there?
Well, I've never bought an airplane from a broker, but there are brokers, and I believe that does give you some level of feeling of security, I would imagine. Obviously, that's going to increase the cost a bit for the broker's fees and all that. There are so many different platforms out there now, between Alaska's List, Craigslist, and then of course Facebook, the Facebook forums and all that, and I personally don't believe you need to go through a broker. That's just my opinion. First thing you need to do, of course, is figure out what your mission is. I always tell people, man, if you don't have a specific mission for the airplane, think long and hard about buying it. If it's just something you want to buy because it sounds like it's going to be fun and you want to learn how to fly, or you know how to fly and you want to fly more and things like that, I had a friend just the other day that told me when he first started flying years ago, took a class at UAA. The private pilot ground school, and the instructor, one of the first things the instructor said was, flying is not a hobby. And he was kind of taken aback by that, like, what? He was a brand new pilot, or trying to be a brand new pilot, and he's kind of taken aback. What she meant was, it can't be something, in my opinion, it can't be something that is just kind of off in the corner. Hey, I'll go fly once in a while. It's just too much of an investment. It's to get the license, to all the fixed costs to go along with it. It's kind of got to be, you got to have a mission for it. It's got to be a lifestyle. And that kind of goes along with the partnership thing. Your lifestyle, your feeling about the airplane have to be kind of the same. And so that kind of airplane you buy is one of the most difficult decisions you're going to make.
I see Aras over here.
That's very true. I mean, I couldn't agree more with fitting the airplane to your mission. I mean, I've seen countless people say, I want to buy what, you know how expensive that can be. Oh, well, I really like that airplane. That's not what, I mean, it's, if you've got the money for it, sure, but if you're just trying to build time, for instance, the majority of people that ask this question to me, they're just building time. Your goal is to build as much flight time as possible for as cheap as possible for the majority of the people. You don't need a fast airplane. Slower, I mean, you can go down to, the Cessna 140, Cessna 150s, and it's more than enough to build time for you. And, the plane's slow, but you need time. So getting places takes more time, but you're getting more time. And they're less expensive to fly. I've seen people, their mission is that they run they're wanting to run a charter service, or they're wanting to take family members out and about flying, or they're going to be doing a lot of that type of work. Then, completely different story on what they get recommended. If you're planning on doing solely bush flying, or you want to solely do, off airport flying, you're different aircraft completely. If you don't really care about that, completely different airplane. And from my experience looking at where people sell airplanes, just like John said, I mean, just look everywhere. Don't fixate on, I want to buy from a broker. Facebook has been great. I've seen many people buy off there. Craigslist, Alaska, or just going alongside the airport. You see for sale signs on certain airplanes that you just never see anywhere else. Going on to, you just see posters up by fuel stations or FBOs. I mean, they just everywhere. Some of them are just hidden gems that just no one's seen yet.
And that also brings back to the question of pre-buys and working with your mechanic. So that eliminates a lot of those things from going to a mechanic. We talked about brokers, we talked about the dealerships, and then just the regular person off the street. But if your mechanic's coming with you to do this pre-buy, they should be able to identify some of those challenges. So going to a broker or dealership is not going to be as big an advantage. The other question, I guess, is cost, guys. Buying a plane in Alaska as opposed to going to the lower 48 and buying one. What kind of premium are you seeing here in Alaska?
It seems, in my experience, it's all over the place. You can get a hell of a good deal down in the lower 48, but it costs a lot to fly it up here. I've seen great deals for planes up here. I've seen great deals for planes down in the lower 48. It really just depends on the, it really depends. It's kind of I don't know what your experience, John, but I've seen it all over
and I agree. Generally speaking, I think it might be a little cheaper down, especially if they're tail draggers, Cubs, and 180s, 185s, might be a bit cheaper down there. But one problem with buying an airplane in the lower 48 is you got to get down there, and it may be a fun trip to bring it back up. I've done some ferrying trips back and forth in a couple of different airplanes, and it's a blast. And so that's an adventure in itself. But the problem is finding the airplane and knowing that it's what you really want and that it's being as advertised when you go down there. The only airplane I bought down south was I had an old Beech 18, a twin engine tail dragger radial. And the reason it worked out for me is because I went to an outfit in Detroit that had 4 Beech 18s. And they said, oh, you come down here, you can pick which one you want. So I figured that was a pretty pretty solid risk I was taking by spending all the time down there. And that plus I ferried a 152 down there. And so I was kind of double dipping. But so let's say you find what you think is the perfect airplane and you buy a ticket down to Amarillo, Texas or something, and it's not what was advertised. Number one, either you've completely wasted your time and money going down there, or number two, maybe even worse, you end up buying it because you spent so much time and money and all that, and then it's, there's some kind of issues with it and things like that. So that's the problem with going down to lower 48. I have a friend who bought a plane for his airline pilot, and he bought a plane for his son to learn how to fly, a 152. But his father-in-law was a mechanic down in Missouri, and he found him the airplane. You know what I mean? And then, sure enough, they brought the airplane up, got his time in it, sold it for more than he bought it for. But that's because he had his father-in-law down there who was an IA too, looking for airplanes. So if you have some kind of a like that, then it could be a good deal. But I would be a little bit afraid of trying to find an airplane down there and not sharing. I mean, you get all the pictures in the world, and an annual, as Aras will tell you, annuals are not all created equal. Just because an airplane's got an annual on it does not mean that it's ship shape and ready to go by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah, that brings up another question one I have. So just saying a lot of our pilots are trying to save money, especially for that first aircraft. High-timed engines and above a certain levels, TBO, between overhauls. Aras, can you give us an idea of what that is, if it's safe to fly a high-hour engine, and what the regs say?
So for Part 91 or general aviation, what I fly under, TBO is a number that we do not have to comply with. It is a 135, 121 operation. If it's in their maintenance specs, they will comply with the overhaul.
I'm going to stop you right there because there's a lot of jargon there that some people might not be familiar with. So Part 95, I'm assuming, is a
Part 91. So that's generally that's the person that flies for fun, the person that has your training environment. Part 135 is your smaller commercial outfits, and then Part 121 is your Alaska Airlines, your major airlines, or certain level of aircraft.
Part 91, which is private pilot,
Or private pilot, not for hire, I think is what they define it as, and we do not, because we're not for hire, do not have to follow TBO limits unless it's referenced in an AD note. That's a little bit different, but
and then the TBO is
time between overhaul. So that's the engine manufacturer's recommended time from start time to end, usually based on hours or years in service. And I think for most aircraft engines, they say 12 years in service, and anywhere from 1,500 hours to 2,400 hours of engine time for the recips.
And then that's going to be, the TBO is going to be based on the engine and the engine manufacturer.
Engine manufacturer, engine model, and it'll vary significantly just because a 0470 is 1,500 hours here. Another model 0470 might be a 2,200 hour TBO. It really depends. It's something that you have to look into. There's great resources on finding out what the TBO is.
What's the average for I guess most of the airmen here would be flying for personal aircraft, a Lycom.
Lycom air. So I think the average for TBOs are around 1,800 hours. That's about what some are high. This is really rough average. Okay. But TBO isn't completely everything. For instance, 12 years on an engine is not uncommon. I mean, seeing a Part 91 aircraft with more than 12 years of the engine being on it without overhaul is extremely common. I actually don't know a single person that we maintain an airplane for that has had an engine installed in the past 12 years. Just because we don't fly it as much as 135. So the time, the years in service is not really the big kicker. It's the time in service. And even then, the total amount of time can vary. If it's an engine that, has got 100 hours on it since, the 80s and has, just sat there rotting away with no preventative action to it, that's a concern. On the same token, the engine's got, 3,000 hours on it been flown regularly, but still at 3,000 hours, that engine's getting pretty tired. So.
John, any thoughts on buying a higher timed engine and a higher timed aircraft to save money?
Well, it does increase the mystery of it, a little bit of a risk, obviously, the more hours you have on it. However, I don't think, and I think Aras will agree, that time alone is not necessarily a horrible thing. Plenty of engines go many hours. If I were thinking, if I had a high time engine in an airplane, and I was thinking about trying to remove and replace it, and it was running well, and my cylinders were up, and I wasn't replacing cylinders, there's no way I would remove that airplane and put a new engine in it. First of all, every time you put a new engine in an airplane, you've got a little bit more mystery there too, because you don't know how well that's going to run. And if you've got an engine that's running well, I don't think the time Part 91 is as big a deal, as long as it's running well. And there's lots of spec analysis you can do with the oil and you send it off monthly or every 50 hours or whatever the deal is, and you can kind of monitor it that way. And then you do routine compression checks and
it is high hours or high mileage on one of these engines, if you want to call it that way. They don't just grenade on you while you're in the air and just blow apart. Most of them, what is your experience?
Well, if it's a 777, sometimes it will. Yeah, I mean, you just never know, Domenic. I mean, it could, but it doesn't happen very often, for sure. And usually you've got some kind of a warning that your engine's beginning to give up the ghost. You got some cylinders going and things like that. But one thing about a high time engine is you'll get a better deal on the airplane. But then what you have to do is, especially if it's a extremely high time engine, a couple thousand hours, not that that's super high, but say you got a couple thousand hours on an engine, on an airplane you want to buy, well, in your back pocket, you better have the cost of that engine so that if it does go, and realize that that's going to be an expense that you may have to do in the near future. So, but you might get, might be able to buy the airplane for 20 grand less or something.
We have another question that just came in, and this is a really good one too. Alaska has unique and extreme weather conditions. What should one take into account when buying an aircraft in the lower 48 for the aircraft to be Alaska ready? And what additional adaptations or extra equipment should be planned out?
Well, that is one reason that tail draggers are so popular up here. I don't know if it's the majority, but certainly a tremendous number of airplanes on both Lake Hood and Merrill Field are tail draggers. You go down the lower 48 and you're lucky to see one or two per airport. And boy, they're pretty proud of those if they've got a tail dragger down there. So, and we do have there's more mods than you can shake a stick at for different conditions and applications, and it depends on the airplane. So different models and makes have different types of mods you can do. Cubs are notorious for just all kinds of experimental and even tried and true mods, from flapper-ons to first you got to decide, okay, do I want a nose dragger or a tricycle geared aircraft, or do I want a tail dragger? And that's going to depend on the type of flying you want to do. You're going to find a lot more tricycle geared down there and a lot less tail draggers. That's one of the main differentiations that you want to think about. If you do want to land on some sandbars and do a little bit of backcountry kind of stuff, then you probably should, well, you don't have to, but you probably should get a tail dragger. Any other like mods and stuff like that?
I guess so. Yeah, I guess that's the benefit of buying an aircraft up here is most of these planes have gone through the standard bigger wheels. Bigger wheels are wheels and tires, I guess, is the main thing that you see up here. You go down to the lower 48, you'll see a 180 with little 600 little tiny little wheels on it, and it just would be almost a disgrace to fly one of those up here. So that's what I see most people do is if they're buying an aircraft specifically for Alaska from the lower 48. When I know we've done a few of them at the shop that I work at, is it comes in, it's got tiny tires on it, usually wheel fairings or wheel pants, and that's the first thing to go is it's wheel pants off, bigger wheels, or bigger tires, and then if it's a nose wheel airplane, you'll do a Landis big nose wheel fork on them. The tail wheel aircraft, not so much. That's a little bit easier. You can just get away with just doing the main wheels or main tires, and that's usually without getting too terribly crazy with the STCs and everything. That's about what I see normally happening in air in the 48 coming up here. Some people will go into a bigger engine or different propeller, a stall kit, whatnot. Because we really can take advantage of that up here, especially up here. We can take advantage of those performance modifications. And it's nice, a lot of them, up here, it's not, an airplane being sold with a stall kit and bigger tires is not uncommon versus the lower 48. You'll be lucky to find one with a stall kit. I mean, just very uncommon. And that is something that's nice to have already installed because the install times and costs are pretty high, especially shipping up here can be pretty pricey.
So I guess to answer the gentleman's question that had end is, there's no real Alaska mods that are needed. It's just all these nice to have that you might find up here.
Yeah, I'd say that. You can get it's again mission specific. I mean, if you're going airport to airport, plane from the lower 48 is as good as a plane from up here. It really doesn't matter. But if you're going into the backcountry, you want to start changing things up to make it a safer airplane to use in the backcountry. And then, and I think one of the parts of the question was the climate, I think, is what it was? Climate, I would say, is a pretty big factor. I've seen airplanes from, on the coast of Florida that come up here with more corrosion issues than I can count, or airplanes that have spent their entire life in a dry hangar in Texas that look absolutely immaculate from day one. The climate can play a major factor in aircraft, especially with corrosion being one of the biggest issues that you run into.
That's a great segue into our next question too. You had mentioned STCs.
What is an STC? An STC is it's called the definition is it's a supplemental type certificate, or it changes a major aspect of the original type certificate of the aircraft, or what the aircraft is certified under. So any major changes, putting on a bigger engine would be a STC, putting on a stall kit would be an STC, and countless other items. It can be anything from a small little clock going into the airplane to something major like converting the gear style from a tail wheel or from a nose dragger to a tail wheel. It really varies.
And those are called supplemental type certificates.
Supplemental type certificates, correct.
And John, do you ever elaborate on anything on supplemental type certificates? Anything that you ran into?
Well, they do vary quite a bit, and you need them for actually pretty simple things like you need an STC paperwork at least to run auto gas in 180s and things like that. So that's really just a paperwork deal because you don't modify the airplane at all. You just somebody's just making money selling the STCs. So it can be as simple as that, or as complex as changing it from a nose wheel aircraft to a tail wheel.
And we got a question here. What is exactly a stall kit? We can hear that a lot.
So a stall kit is it can be done various different ways. A change to the leading edge profile of the aircraft by either changing you're basically changing the leading edge to create more lift, or in some cases it'll be you'll have vortex generators, which basically allow the airflow of the wing to hold on a lot longer, or you'll have stall fences, which are just I guess I don't know really the best way to describe a stall fence, but improves control surface or low speed control, and then also, getting, into flaperons where your ailerons will actually droop down with the flaps. And then, with some of the Cubs, you'll have trying to think of what else
What exactly is stall? It sounds the same.
Short takeoff and landing is basically what.
Short takeoff or landing?
Yeah.
And then I'm imagining anything that helps that.
Anything that improves that is, wing modifications or other, other aircraft modifications. There's some pretty crazy ones out there for, 182s have a front canard, and that's, part of their STOL kit.
And why is the STOL kit so important here in Alaska?
Well, we have shorts. We most of the flying is, a lot of the excitement is the bush flying or off airport flying, and some of these airports get pretty tight, and having being able to land shorter or take off faster and at a shorter distance it can be very important for getting into some of these areas. Getting into a gravel bar with a stock 172 might be something that would be unfeasible, but now, you have a STOL kit and a bigger engine. Well, now you can actually get to these places. It's pretty easy.
We've got STCs, but there's some question with the paperwork too. So buying an aircraft, it should have its own logbooks.
Correct.
Similar to an pilot log.
Yeah, so the logbooks will basically show, current annual airworthiness directive compliances, all STCs, 337s, which are major repairs or modifications. It's all the documentation, and ideally from day one. Ideally, you want, logbooks from the day it rolled off the factory floor. But also some airplanes, for whatever reason, logbooks got lost, and they have, a couple of years of logbooks that will significantly devalue the aircraft, which for some people, they're okay with that. They don't care about having the complete logbooks. They don't care about, whatever it may be, as long as it's legal paperwork-wise current. That might be, I've seen some people that, bought airplanes with reconstructed logbooks and significantly lowered the cost down. But, resale obviously hurts too on that.
So if you don't have the STC, you didn't have it.
Yeah, and it can be very expensive for lost logbooks. You find a part that is supposed to be STC and there's no paperwork for it. I mean, you can't legally have that on the aircraft. Getting that might be a challenge, or it might not even be possible.
And does the propeller, the engine, and the airframe?
Correct. Yeah, propeller, airframe, and engine logbooks. Those are the three main component logbooks. And certain aircraft, you'll have other people will make logbooks for certain like avionics if it's a bigger operation, whatnot.
And that goes with the aircraft. And you were showing me too. There's a panel on the plane that logbook attaches to.
Well, no, there's so in the aircraft, you just carry a registration and an airworthiness certificate. Normally, logbooks are not kept in the aircraft due to the, their high value. Some of these logbooks are worth as much as the aircraft. They're a major value component to it. So you keep them in a safe, safe, dry place.
That makes perfect sense. And then going on with the logbook, so if I don't get an STC with it, I can go experimental with my aircraft.
Well, you can either, you can do, before you get into the experimental category, you can go into what's called a field approval, where there's something that you want to do to the aircraft that's different than anyone else is certified for. You want to put 20 or 31-inch tires on a 172, which, it's been done before by field approval. It's not not an STC you can buy from somebody, but you have to go through a process of going with the FAA, filling out a ton of paperwork for it. And it's like a one-time, that airplane has now got that one component on, it's legal on that one aircraft, that one serial numbered aircraft. And then, I mean, if you get into the super crazy stuff like, swapping a turbine engine onto an airplane that originally didn't have one like Draco did, you're now getting into experimental category where it wouldn't be feasible to certify that.
Okay, and then I'll move over to John. John may have some thoughts on this. Experimental aircraft. I can just drop a turbine on my Cessna 150 and fly it?
Well, no. There are certain hoops you have to jump through, and then of course experimental aircraft are restricted. You can't make any money with it, yeah, it's not home builds are the most common type of quote unquote experimental aircraft, but they have a lot of hoops to jump through and inspections and that kind of thing. And that's one way though to get into the market if you're willing to do the sweat equity and all that, home built. Bang for your buck if you've got a place to do it and the time to do it. Most of them are set up so that with the plans and if somebody's reasonably mechanical, hands-on kind of person, they can do it. Yeah.
And we need another question, and Aras, going to go back to you on this one, and then John also. And Sarah, if you can also elaborate on this. The question is which airplanes are more expensive to maintain? I'm going to start off with saying, let's kind of narrow it down to the Cessna 180 category or less. Just your average first-time pilot.
So, so I'll group it into the low bore aircraft. So you've got the main driving component for the most part is the engine size. Like Cessna 140, 150, or some of the Taylor crafts or less guns will have a Continental C85 O2 or an O200. Those are a small bore Continental, so the operating costs are a lot less. Your fuel burn and oil consumption is significantly less. It's a lot simpler of an aircraft. You've got 4 cylinders instead of 6 cylinders. You've got so many less components that you need, and just in general a less expensive engine. And that also goes with usually a less expensive aircraft. A Cessna 140 is a lot cheaper than let's say a Cessna 180. It's just such a more expensive aircraft because now it's a large scale aircraft. You have now a lot bigger engine in it, double or more horsepower, and just maintenance costs go along with that, and so do fuel burn. So the engine's really the big driving factor in that.
And John, do you have anything to add to that as far as what airplanes are more expensive over some other ones to maintain? And I think they asked maintain more than anything.
Oh, to maintain? Well, there are certain airplanes which are kind of legendary for being real expensive to maintain, mainly like the Gila Courier and things like that there aren't a lot of. Generally speaking, if you've got an airplane which there are a lot of around, like 180s and 172s, 172 is the most common airplane in the world, 150s, 152s. The more common the aircraft is, the more parts are going to be available, the cheaper the stuff, and also used parts if that's, if it's not a, critical kind of part, sometimes you can get a hold of. The more common airplanes are usually the cheapest to maintain. If you're going to talk about maintaining, and you're thinking about the term we use is rag bag, a fabric covered aircraft, then you've got a whole different ball of wax as far as inspection goes. How much time's on the airframe, on the fabric and the paint and all that, and when it's going to have to be recovered. Hugely expensive to recover those. You got a price on what it would cost?
I can't even think of a price on a recover. It really depends on the aircraft and who's doing it, but and what type of fabric, what type of paint you're doing on it. But that just goes into it's basically rebuilding the aircraft when you're recovering. Most people don't just recover it; they'll if it's all apart, they'll sandblast and repaint the fuselage. You'll do major. It's a major undertaking for the most part.
Yeah.
And that can that goes up into the $50,000+ for something like that.
And that also brings up paint jobs.
Yep.
You get your average 172 or 180 or some paint job with 25,000.
Yeah, easily.
And a lot of them. And the paint job is important because corrosion is one of the huge bugaboos in aircraft ownership and that kind of thing. So you want to make sure you got a good paint job, or have the money set aside in order to paint it if you're if it needs it in order to keep up with it. Yeah.
I guess, so we're going to wrap up against the hour here, guys. I really appreciate everyone coming in and your knowledge here. To wrap things up, if anybody has a last minute question at home, please send it to the chat on Zoom. And if not, we're going to, I'd like to ask each one of you just an overview. So first time pilot, first time aircraft owner, what are some of the pitfalls? What are some of the things? What's that last little bit to leave our audience with as they think about buying their own airplane?
Well, the first thing I would say is there's an old joke. The second happiest day of your life is the day that you buy your airplane. And the first happiest day of your life is the day you sell it.
No better way to put that.
I think it goes back to this idea of being a lifestyle or having a mission for it. Be careful. I don't mean to be a downer here, but be careful about just kind of having stars in your eyes about, hey, I want to own an airplane. It's the fixed cost and then the surprising the surprises. It can be really dramatic. You've got to figure $600 a year just for tie down. If you're lucky, you'll pay maybe only $3,000 a year for insurance, depending on how many hours you have and the type of airplane and things like that. If you want to get a tail dragger or want to fly floats and you don't have much time, $10,000 a year is not. So check into insurance, how much that's going to cost. Decide where you want to be based, Merrifield, Lake Hood, find out what the tie downs are going to be. It's really nice to have a relationship with a mechanic. If you know somebody who is a mechanic or know somebody who knows somebody who's a mechanic in a shop or otherwise, that's really nice. Be willing to work on the airplane yourself, at least to some degree, at least to open it up for the IA to come in and do the inspection. That's gonna save you, because heck, opening up the airplane takes the guys as long to do that as it does to do the inspection practically. So lifestyle should be a lifestyle.
That's great advice. Lars, what do you have as well?
No, I couldn't agree more with that. That is probably the best way to put that. I mean, it is a major undertaking. It's not something simple. I see so many people, like, oh, I found this great airplane for, X amount of money. That sounds like a great deal. And the wait a minute, what's it going to cost? Like the operational costs. I know for me, the big driving factor for airplane ownership for me is insurance. Insurance for a lower time. I'm at the 200-hour mark. A float plane would be out of the question, regardless of I could buy the float plane for all of $10. Insurance would be absurd. Insurance, if you can even get insurance, a tailwheel insurance is an extreme cost for the lower time pilots. Of course, you have higher time pilots, not really a factor in that. But yeah, that's the cost of ownership is just the unforeseen costs.
Cool. Well, I very much appreciate you guys joining us today, and everybody back in Zoom land. We will wrap things up today, but if you have any questions, we can email the Alaska Airmen, and we'll get in touch and make sure that we get that information out to our guests. Great, I appreciate everybody. John Fick at the King Career Center Aviation Team, thank you. And Aras Sirvelis with Pratt, we're currently at Pratt
Aviation. Yep.
Thank you very much for joining us, guys. We'll go ahead and wrap up, and I appreciate everybody who's online today.